You bought a Tesla. You're probably already pretty careful with it. But in my experience working with EV owners, the people who end up with the worst battery degradation, the shortest range, and the most unexpected repair bills aren't the reckless ones. They're the careful ones who just didn't know what they were doing wrong. And that's the thing about these mistakes. Most of them don't feel like mistakes. They feel like the right thing to do. That's exactly why they keep happening, and exactly why they cause so much damage over time. So today, we're going through 13 of them, counting down from 13 to 1. By the time we hit number 1, you're going to look at your charging habits, your driving style, and a few of your favorite Tesla features very differently. Let's get into it. Mistake 13. Misusing autopilot and full self-driving. Let's open with this one because, honestly, I don't think it gets talked about seriously enough outside of news headlines. Autopilot and full self-driving are driver assistance systems. They are not autonomous. Tesla says this plainly in their documentation. The driver must remain attentive, hands available, and ready to take control at any moment. What I've seen happen more times than I'd like is that drivers use these features on familiar routes and slowly stop paying attention. The system handles the lane, the following distance, the speed, and the brain checks out. The problem shows up in situations the system doesn't anticipate well. Tight construction zones, emergency vehicles parked on the shoulder, unexpected debris, or complex multi-lane merges where the car's decision-making hesitates. It's not that the system fails dramatically. Usually what happens is it slows unexpectedly, steers slightly wider than you'd expect, or disengages without much warning, and if your attention has drifted, a few seconds of reaction time is already gone. That gap is where things get serious. Use these features, but treat them the way a pilot treats autopilot on a commercial flight, monitoring constantly, never fully delegating. Mistake 12. Skipping scheduled maintenance because it's an EV. Customers come into the shop all the time with the assumption that a Tesla needs basically nothing done to it. No oil, no transmission fluid, no spark plugs. So they figure, what's left? Quite a bit, actually, and the things that do need attention are often the ones that cause expensive problems when they're ignored. Brake fluid absorbs moisture over time regardless of how rarely you use the physical brakes. Tesla recommends testing it every 2 years, and in my experience, owners who skip this are the ones who find out the hard way during an emergency stop in wet conditions. Separately, because regenerative braking handles most of the slowing in a Tesla, the friction brakes don't get used often enough to self-clean. I've seen brake calipers on low-mileage Teslas that were seized or corroding simply because they sat unused too long. Tesla does build in a brake disc wiping feature that applies a tiny amount of friction in wet conditions specifically to prevent this, but it's not a substitute for a proper inspection. Cabin air filters, tire rotations, and wiper blades all still wear out on the same schedule as any other car. The battery pack weight actually means tires wear faster than on lighter vehicles, so skipping rotations leads to uneven wear patterns that reduce range and compromise handling. These are small, inexpensive services that most owners are putting off indefinitely, and that's where it becomes a much bigger bill later. Mistake 11. Supercharging in extreme heat without any preparation. Most people know that DC fast charging generates heat inside the battery pack. What's less understood is what happens when you layer that onto an already hot ambient environment. Say, a supercharger in direct sunlight on a 95-degree afternoon in the middle of a road trip. The battery's thermal management system is working hard to pull that heat out. In moderate conditions, it handles it well, but in severe heat, what I've noticed is that the system sometimes has to throttle charging speed to prevent the pack from climbing into temperature ranges that cause accelerated chemical degradation. You'll see the charging speed drop on the screen, and most people assume it's just the battery filling up. Often, it's actually a thermal protection response. Tesla's own documentation acknowledges that air conditioning performance may be reduced during supercharging sessions in very hot weather, because the cooling capacity is being redirected to the battery. So you're sitting in a warm car, charging slower than expected, in conditions that are harder on the pack. What genuinely helps is routing to superchargers that are shaded, charging in the cooler parts of the day when you can plan for it, and giving the car a few minutes with the climate system running after you unplug before you shut it down. That lets the thermal management finish its job. Mistake 10. Ignoring software updates, or installing them blindly. Tesla pushes over-the-air updates regularly, and they can genuinely improve your car. Better efficiency, refined battery management, updated safety features. But I've also seen updates introduce problems that owners didn't connect to the update because they installed it in their sleep and didn't notice when the behavior changed. There have been documented cases in the owner community where specific firmware versions altered regenerative braking behavior, changed how phantom drain worked while parked, or introduced charging anomalies that took weeks to diagnose. The tricky part is that if you auto-install overnight and something feels different the next day, you're not always going to connect those two things. What usually works better is installing updates when you're home, the car is plugged in, and you have time to take a short drive afterward and notice if anything feels different. If something does change, unexpected battery drain, regen that feels weaker, charging that tops out lower than usual, report it through the in-car bug report immediately while the details are fresh. Staying current matters, but staying aware of what changed is just as important. Mistake 9. Running the cabin heater at full blast every winter morning. A lot of Tesla owners coming from gas cars expect the heater to be basically free. After all, in a combustion vehicle, you're just recycling waste heat from the engine. In an electric vehicle, there is no waste heat. Every degree of cabin warmth comes directly out of the battery. What most people don't realize is that seat heaters and steering wheel heaters are dramatically more energy efficient than heating the entire cabin air. They warm the occupant directly rather than trying to bring a large air volume up to temperature. In cold weather, I found that setting the cabin temperature just a few degrees lower and letting the seat heater do most of the work can extend winter range noticeably compared to running the HVAC hard. There's another layer to this that's worth knowing. If you precondition the cabin while still plugged in, which you can schedule through the app using scheduled departure, the energy used to heat the car comes from the grid, not the battery. So you leave with a warm interior and a full charge, instead of starting the drive with the heater pulling hard on cold cells that are already delivering less than their peak capacity in low temperatures. Mistake 8. Driving aggressively and then wondering why range is low. I hear this one regularly. Someone drives their Model 3 or Model Y and notices they're getting significantly less range than the EPA estimate, and they come in wanting to know if there's a battery problem. In my experience, most of the time, there isn't. The driving style is the issue. Hard acceleration draws enormous current from the pack in a very short time. That current draw generates internal heat, and it depletes the battery at a rate that's disproportionate to the distance covered. Then, when that driver brakes hard at the last second, they're throwing away kinetic energy through friction instead of recovering it through the motor. So they've paid double, once to accelerate hard, and once to brake hard instead of coasting to a stop. What's interesting is that the difference between an aggressive Tesla driver and a smooth one, over the same route, can sometimes be 20–30% in energy consumption. That's not a small margin. Smooth, progressive acceleration and early, light deceleration, letting the car coast and regen its way to a stop, is genuinely the single biggest driving behavior that affects range day to day. People underestimate it because it doesn't feel like much in the moment. Mistake 7. Ignoring tire pressure, especially going into winter. This one sounds so basic that people gloss over it, but in my experience, low tire pressure is one of the most consistent, easily preventable causes of range loss that I see on Teslas coming through, and it's almost always discovered by accident during a check for something else. Underinflated tires increase rolling resistance. The motor has to work harder to maintain speed, and that extra load is coming directly out of your battery. What makes it particularly sneaky on a Tesla is that the TPM's warning light doesn't come on until pressure drops fairly significantly, so you can be riding at 5 psi below spec across all 4 tires with no warning, losing real range every mile, and not know it. Cold weather amplifies this problem in a way that catches a lot of people off guard. Tire pressure drops roughly 1 psi for every 10° Fahrenheit drop in outside temperature. So a car that was perfectly inflated in September can be meaningfully underinflated by December without anyone touching the tires. Get a decent gauge, check pressure monthly, and make it a habit when the seasons change. It takes 3 minutes, and it's one of the more immediate, noticeable things you can do for both range and tire wear. Mistake 6. Not understanding what limits regenerative braking. Regenerative braking is one of the things that makes Tesla ownership feel genuinely different and efficient. But there are two specific conditions where it gets limited significantly, and a lot of drivers don't know about either of them until they're in a situation where the car isn't slowing the way they expect. The first is a fully charged battery. When the pack is at 95% or above, there's very little room to push energy back in through regen. So the system reduces regenerative braking automatically, because feeding charge into an already full battery risks overcharging the cells. If you're used to one-pedal driving and you pull out of the house at 100% charge, the car may feel like it's barely slowing when you lift off the accelerator. That's not a malfunction, it's by design. The second condition is a cold battery. When temperatures drop below roughly 40-50 FF, the cells can't accept charge efficiently, which limits how much energy regen can push back in. You'll see a blue snowflake icon on the instrument cluster. That's the car telling you that a portion of battery capacity and regen ability is temporarily unavailable. As the battery warms up through driving, it comes back. The practical fix for both situations is enabling apply brakes when regenerative braking is limited in the settings, so that friction brakes engage automatically to maintain consistent deceleration even when regen is reduced. Mistake 5. Not preconditioning before cold weather drives. Directly connected to that cold battery behavior, the preconditioning feature exists specifically to solve this problem, and a surprising number of owners never set it up. Preconditioning uses the car's heating system to bring the battery up to operating temperature before you drive, so you're not starting a cold trip on a cold pack. What makes it especially valuable is when you trigger it while the car is still plugged in. The energy used to heat the battery comes from the charger, not from the battery itself, so you're not paying for the warm-up out of your driving range. By the time you leave, the battery is at the temperature where it performs well, regen is fully available, and your estimated range is accurate rather than artificially compressed by cold chemistry. There's also a benefit at the supercharger that people often miss. If you use Tesla navigation to route to a supercharger, the car will automatically precondition the battery on the way there. A warm battery accepts DC fast charge at a much higher rate than a cold one, so you charge faster, spend less time at the station, and put less cumulative thermal stress on the pack than you would hammering cold cells with high current. It's a genuinely well-designed system, but it only helps you if you use it. Mistake 4. Leaving phantom drain features running when parked. This is one of those things I wish every new Tesla owner was told on day one. You can park a Tesla, walk away, and come back the next day to find it has lost a meaningful amount of charge. Not because anything is broken, but because several features keep the car awake and consuming power the entire time it's parked. Sentry mode is the main culprit. It's a great security feature, but it keeps the cameras and sensors running continuously. Some owners on older hardware have reported losing 3–6% per day with it running, which adds up to a significant chunk of charge over a long trip or a few days without access to charging. What's less obvious is that cabin overheat protection, summon standby, and even data sharing settings can all contribute to the car staying partially awake rather than going into a deep sleep state. There's also something worth knowing about the Tesla app itself. Checking it frequently, or leaving third-party EV apps connected, can wake the car from sleep repeatedly throughout the day, each time burning a small amount of energy. Tesla's own documentation notes that onboard electronics consume roughly 1% of charge per day in standby, and every feature that prevents sleep multiplies that figure. Turning Sentry mode off at trusted locations like home and reviewing which features are actively running when parked is one of the easier ways to reduce daily phantom drain without giving up anything you actually need. Mistake 3. Letting the battery sit at charge extremes. We've talked about 100% charging and phantom drain separately, but there's a related issue that affects owners who store their Tesla or who let the battery drop very low before charging, both extremes. Sitting at 100% for extended periods and regularly dropping below 15–20% put the cells under stress in different but real ways. When a battery sits at a high state of charge, particularly in warm temperatures, the cathode material undergoes gradual chemical changes that aren't reversible irreversible. It's a slow process, but it accelerates noticeably when you combine high charge level with heat, like a fully charged Tesla sitting in the sun for hours every day. On the other end, deep discharges force the cells into a range where the BMS has to engage protective modes to prevent damage, and repeated deep cycles can accelerate capacity loss in ways that show up as reduced maximum range over time for owners who park the car for weeks at a time. Travel, a second vehicle they rotate. The recommendation is to leave the battery around 50% and keep it plugged in at a maintained charge limit if possible. That 50% mark is where lithium-ion chemistry is under the least electrochemical stress during storage. It's the same logic behind why electronics manufacturers ship phones and laptops partially charged rather than full. Mistake 2. Using the supercharger as your main charging source. A lot of apartment dwellers and people without home charging fall into this habit, and I understand why. It's the most accessible option. But Tesla themselves updated the Model Y owner's manual to specifically recommend against relying on superchargers for everyday charging. The guidance is clear. Use level 1 or level 2 charging for daily needs, and save supercharging for road trips and longer drives. The reason comes down to what DC fast charging actually does to the battery at the cell level. It pushes very high current in a short window. That high current generates internal heat, and it also increases something called lithium plating risk, where lithium ions deposit unevenly on the anode instead of intercalating properly. This doesn't happen from one session. It's a cumulative effect from frequent, repeated high current charging cycles over months and years. What's worth noting is that the frequency matters more than any single session. Occasional supercharging, even regularly on road trips, is generally well managed by the thermal system. In fact, Tesla's navigation routes the battery through preconditioning specifically to minimize this risk. The problem shows up when supercharging becomes the daily routine, particularly in hot climates where ambient temperature is already adding to the thermal load. If home charging genuinely isn't an option, looking into workplace level 2 charging or nearby public AC chargers as a primary source is worth the effort. Mistake 1. Charging to 100% every day. And here's number 1, because in my experience, this is the habit that shows up most consistently in Teslas with early accelerated degradation. It feels like the obvious thing to do. Maximum charge, maximum range, maximum peace of mind. But what it actually does is keep the battery under sustained electrochemical stress for hours at a time, every single night. Tesla has been direct about this in their official documentation. Set your daily charge limit to around 80%. That figure isn't arbitrary. At 80%, the lithium ions have room to move. The cells are not under maximum lattice stress, and the battery management system has buffer capacity for regenerative braking to work at full effectiveness from the moment you leave. Charging to 100% and sitting there overnight eliminates that buffer and keeps the cathode material in a high-energy state for hours, which is when calendar aging accelerates. The real-world evidence of this plays out clearly. There have been documented cases of Model Y owners losing over 17% of their battery capacity in under 2 years of ownership, and in most of those situations, the charging habits were a significant contributing factor. Dropping the charge limit takes about 10 seconds in the app or in the car's settings. For road trips, charge to 100% the night before, and plan to start driving within an hour or 2 of completing the charge. Don't let it sit at full all morning before you leave. That one habit change, consistently applied, is probably the single most impactful thing you can do to protect long-term battery health on any Tesla model. So there you have it, 13 mistakes, counting down to the one that I see cause the most consistent, long-term damage. The good news is that not a single one of these requires a service visit or any special equipment to fix. Every one of them is a setting to change, a habit to adjust, or something to simply be aware of. If I had to pick 3 to start with today, I'd say drop your daily charge limit to 80%, turn Sentry mode off at home, and check your tire pressure before this week is out. Those 3 things alone will make a measurable difference in range and battery longevity over the months and years ahead. If something in this video surprised you, or if you caught yourself in one of these habits, drop it in the comments. I read every one, and honestly, the comments on videos like this tend to have some of the best real-world experiences from owners who've been through it themselves. Like this video if it was useful. Subscribe if you want more content that actually goes into the detail, not surface-level tips, but the kind of information that genuinely protects what you've invested in. We'll see you in the next one.